General Hospital will reveal Charlotte returned to Port Charles carrying a storm of emotions that had been brewing inside her for far too long. The resentment she felt toward Valentine still lingered, but beneath it lay a deeper sense of loss and betrayal. With no one left to hold on to, no one she could trust, she sought someone to blame for the ruin of her family. Anna had once been the target of her hatred, but now, her fury had found a new focus: Brook Lynn. Memories of her mother remained vivid in her mind, Lulu, so full of love yet burdened with heartbreak. Charlotte had always believed that Lulu and Dante were meant to be together, that their love should have endured beyond all obstacles. But when buried secrets resurfaced, a truth about Brook Lynn's past struck Charlotte like a blade to the heart. Brook Lynn had once been pregnant with Dante's child when they were both still teenagers, an event that Charlotte saw as the catalyst for her mother's suffering. In her young but calculating mind, Brook Lynn had been the wedge that fractured Lulu's happiness, the force that had shattered what should have been a perfect love. The more Charlotte dwelled on it, the more her thoughts twisted into a dangerous obsession. Brook Lynn was not just a mistake from the past, she was the reason everything had fallen apart. Charlotte began watching her, following her movements with an eerie sense of detachment, her cold and calculating gaze never missing a single detail. Her anger no longer flared impulsively, instead, it was quiet, insidious, simmering beneath the surface as she carefully devised her next steps. She was no longer just a reckless child lashing out in blind fury, she was learning the power of patience, the art of manipulation. Charlotte did not need to confront Brook Lynn directly. Instead, she chose a more insidious path. With carefully placed words and subtle suggestions, she began planting seeds of doubt in the minds of those closest to Brook Lynn. Innocent remarks that hinted at long-forgotten mistakes, seemingly accidental revelations that forced others to question everything they thought they knew. Slowly but surely, Charlotte ensured that Brook Lynn's past became an open wound once again, one that could no longer be ignored. What made Charlotte truly dangerous was her willingness to wait. This time, she would not act out of desperation or recklessness. She would wait for the perfect moment, the precise second when her plan would strike with the most devastating effect. And when that moment came, Charlotte would not hesitate. Charlotte's fury burned hotter with each passing moment as she returned to Windermere, the place that had once been her home but now felt like nothing more than a relic of a life she no longer belonged to. The sprawling corridors, the dimly lit halls, and the ever-present weight of Cassadine history pressed down on her like an omen. She had spent her childhood in these very walls, believing in the strength and unity of her family, only to watch it crumble before her eyes. Valentine had abandoned her. Lulu was still lost to a coma with no guarantee of return. And Dante had moved on, building a life that no longer revolved around her mother. Nothing was as it should have been. And someone had to pay for it. As she wandered through the shadows of Windermere, Charlotte's fingers traced along the dust-coated relics of her family's past. It was in this moment, in the stillness of a forgotten chamber, that she stumbled upon something that sent a jolt through her spine. A dagger. But not just any dagger, this one bore the unmistakable insignia of Helena Cassadine. The wicked matriarch's reach extended even beyond the grave, her legacy of vengeance embedded in the very metal of the blade. The weight of it felt right in Charlotte's grasp, as if it had been waiting for her, calling to her across time. 1,000 stories had been told about the horrors Helena had inflicted with this weapon. Murders. Betrayals. The Cassadine name was drenched in blood, and yet, history had always remembered Helena for her cunning, her ruthlessness, her ability to execute her plans without hesitation. Charlotte, in her heart, had always feared Helena. But at this moment, standing there with the dagger in her hand, she no longer feared her, she understood her. A dangerous thought took root in her mind: if Helena could exact revenge on those who wronged her, why couldn't she? Why shouldn't she? Her grip on the dagger tightened as images flashed through her mind. Anna, the woman who had stolen Valentine's love and corrupted him into someone who had abandoned his own daughter. Brook Lynn, the woman whose past sins had helped unravel the life Lulu and Dante were meant to have. Charlotte could see it so clearly now. She was not a helpless child lost in the chaos of the world. She was a Cassadine. And Cassadines did not sit idly by while their enemies thrived. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. She had spent so long feeling powerless, but now, destiny had placed something tangible in her hands. This dagger was more than just an artifact of the past, it was a symbol of what she could become. A force that would no longer be ignored. She brought the blade closer, studying its gleaming edge under the flickering light of an old chandelier. It was sharp. Unforgiving. Just like she needed to be. Her mind whirled with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Would she strike when her target least expected it? Or would she make them suffer first, let them feel the slow, creeping dread of knowing what was coming? Charlotte's heart pounded, the rush of anticipation unlike anything she had ever felt before. The anger that had been eating away at her, consuming her in silence, now had an outlet. She had been given a sign. This wasn't just about revenge. This was justice. Under the pale glow of the moon, Charlotte clutched the dagger in her trembling fingers, the cold metal pressing against her palm as her thoughts spiraled deeper into the abyss of betrayal. The weight of Helena Cassadine's legacy hung heavy over her shoulders, whispering to her through the steel in her grip, feeding the storm of rage that had been festering inside her for so long. Brook Lynn had destroyed everything, shattered the life that should have belonged to Lulu, to Dante, to her. And tonight, Charlotte would finally make her pay. She had spent days watching, waiting, lurking in the shadows as Brook Lynn moved through her daily routine, taking note of every pattern, every careless moment when she was alone. Charlotte had learned patience, had studied her enemy the way a predator studies its prey. There was no rush. Revenge, when executed correctly, was an art, and she intended to perfect it. The opportunity presented itself on a quiet evening, when the streets had emptied and the city had fallen into its usual nighttime hush. Brook Lynn, unaware of the storm brewing in the darkness, took a solitary walk through the park, her footsteps slow and unguarded as she enjoyed the crisp night air. Charlotte had followed her at a distance, the dagger concealed beneath the folds of her jacket, her breath shallow with anticipation. Every fiber of her being screamed for release, for the satisfaction of making Brook Lynn feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused. Emerging from the shadows, Charlotte moved with quiet precision, her steps soundless against the pavement. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves like murmurs of unseen spectators. Brook Lynn paused, sensing something, perhaps the chill of the night, or the phantom weight of unseen eyes upon her. But by the time she turned, it was too late. Charlotte stood just a few feet away, her figure shrouded in darkness, but her eyes blazed with unfiltered fury. Her grip tightened around the dagger's hilt, her knuckles white with the pressure. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment fate had handed to her like a gift wrapped in the ribbons of justice and vengeance. She could almost hear Helena's voice urging her forward, telling her that hesitation was weakness, that retribution was power. Brook Lynn's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she took in Charlotte's stance, the dagger glinting ominously under the moonlight. A flicker of realization crossed her face, but before she could react, Charlotte took a step closer, her breath steady, her heart pounding like a drum heralding the arrival of reckoning. She had come too far to stop now. The night belonged to her, and soon, Brook Lynn would understand the cost of betrayal. The night had been perfect. The stars hung above like silent witnesses, the cold air sharpening Charlotte's senses as she prepared to bring her vengeance to life. Every moment had led to this, the betrayal, the pain, the growing fire in her chest that screamed for justice. The dagger felt like an extension of her own will, the blade cool against her fingertips as she advanced toward Brook Lynn, her breath steady, her mind resolute. But then, just as she was about to strike, something shifted. A flicker of memory, a whisper of the past breaking through the walls of anger she had built so carefully. Lulu's laughter. It was light and musical, echoing from a place Charlotte had tried so hard to bury. She saw her mother's smile, the way her eyes crinkled with warmth when she told stories about love, about kindness, about the strength it took to forgive instead of destroy. Charlotte remembered curling up beside her, listening to those words as though they were absolute truths. Lulu had believed in compassion, in second chances. Even when life had torn her apart, even when heartbreak had threatened to consume her, she had never let darkness win. Charlotte's grip faltered. The dagger wavered in her hand. Brook Lynn shifted slightly, unaware of the war raging inside her would-be attacker. The motion was small, but it was enough. Charlotte's wrist trembled, her aim breaking at the last second. Instead of plunging the blade deep into its intended target, it sliced across Brook Lynn's arm, drawing only a thin line of crimson against her skin. The sound of Brook Lynn's sharp gasp hit Charlotte like a thunderclap. For the first time since she had grasped the dagger in Windmere, Charlotte truly saw what she was doing. The hatred that had fueled her, the hunger for revenge that had consumed her, suddenly felt foreign. She had wanted to be strong, to take control, to become someone who could not be ignored. But standing there now, watching Brook Lynn clutch her wounded arm with wide, stunned eyes, Charlotte felt something far worse than anger, she felt horror. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tightening as reality came crashing down around her. She had almost crossed a line she could never return from. This wasn't justice. This wasn't power. This was something else, something dangerous, something that twisted her into someone she didn't recognize. Panic surged through her veins like wildfire. She couldn't be here. She couldn't let anyone see her like this. The dagger slipped from her shaking fingers, landing with a dull thud against the ground, forgotten in the dirt. Her legs moved before she could think, before Brook Lynn could say a word. She turned and ran, the night swallowing her whole as she fled from the consequences of her own actions. Her heart pounded, her thoughts a blur of emotions too tangled to unravel. The image of Brook Lynn's shocked face burned in her mind, but even more than that, her mother's voice lingered, gentle yet firm, as if urging her to see the truth. She wasn't Helena Cassadine. She wasn't a monster. But tonight, she had almost become one. Charlotte may not have completed her plan, but the events of that night had changed her forever. The weight of what she had almost done clung to her, an invisible force pressing against her chest with every breath. As she ran through the empty streets of Port Charles, the world around her blurred into meaningless shapes. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, her mind racing with conflicting emotions, fear, shame, regret, but also something far more unsettling. A deep, gnawing sense of unfinished business. She had been so close. The dagger had been in her hand, the target within reach. She had prepared herself for that moment, convinced herself that Brook Lynn's suffering would be justified. And yet, at the last second, she had faltered. Not because she had been afraid, but because something inside her had pulled her back, something she wasn't sure she wanted to listen to. The memory of Lulu's laughter had struck her like a bolt of lightning, shattering the resolve she had built. It had been unexpected, uninvited, yet powerful enough to make her hesitate. But why? Hadn't she spent weeks preparing for this? Hadn't she convinced herself that revenge was the only way to make things right? And yet, all it had taken was a fleeting memory of her mother's kindness to throw her off course. Was this a sign of weakness? Or was it a sign that she could still be saved? The question haunted her as she finally slowed her pace, her breathing ragged, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of what had just happened. She had left Brook Lynn alive, wounded, yes, but alive. That had not been the plan. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret it completely. There was a part of her, buried deep beneath the anger, that was relieved. But another part of her, one that had been growing stronger ever since she had been abandoned, hurt, and betrayed, was furious. Had she let herself be weak? Had she failed to be what she was meant to become? Charlotte had always been told that she carried the blood of the Cassidines, a name that struck fear into the hearts of many. She had spent her life trying to live up to the expectations that came with that name, but she had also resisted its darkest impulses. But now, standing at the crossroads between her past and her future, she wasn't sure which path to take. She had felt something that night, something powerful, something intoxicating. Holding that dagger, knowing she had complete control over someone else's fate, had given her a rush unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had never felt so powerful, so alive. It had been thrilling and terrifying all at once. The worst part? She wanted to feel it again. This wasn't over. She might have hesitated tonight, but what about next time? What if, next time, there was no memory of Lulu to stop her? What if, next time, she allowed herself to fully embrace what she had started? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. Port Charles had no idea what was coming. They saw her as a troubled teenager, a girl who had been through too much, a child struggling to find her place in the world. But they didn't see what was truly happening beneath the surface. They didn't see the storm brewing inside her, the darkness that was beginning to consume her from within. Brook Lynn had been the first. But she wouldn't be the last. The people who had hurt her, who had betrayed her, who had broken the life she should have had, they would all pay. One way or another.